What's up guys, it's me Lumos Theromax, and today I'm here to discuss the disturbingly powerful feats of Parallax Hal Jordan, arguably one of the most destructive members of the Lantern community. And obviously this character is wildly powerful, and it's a display at every single point in time where he's the focal point of a story or even shows up during like an event or anything else along those lines, because he traditionally almost always wrecks entire teams of superheroes everywhere he goes. So much so it's even become a meme. Big shoutouts to my boy Gravity Titan for requesting the video, and don't forget to like and subscribe down low. But let's get into the details of the once hero, now fallen madman known as Parallax Hal Jordan. So as always, I do a quick history recap of the character I'm doing, and this character is actually a fusion of two separate characters. So we'll go ahead and start off with Hal Jordan first, and we'll get to the second one later. Hal Jordan in the late 80s, early 90s was essentially one of arguably the most powerful Green Lanterns alive, and was a prominent member of the Justice League, having been around them ever since its conception. However, as a result of the death of Superman era and the destruction of Coast City, he had basically let fear creep into his mind that he'd never be able to atone for the deaths of everybody he had known within Coast City, even though it wasn't necessarily his fault in terms of preventing that destruction. It happened while he wasn't even on the planet. And in a fit of what Batman would call madness, but what Superman would call grief, he went on a massive killing spree of any Green Lantern trying to stop himself from returning to Oa and the Central Power Battery. Hal had thought with the power that the Central Power Battery has in its reserves, he could do literally anything, even bring back Coast City and its inhabitants from their own destruction. And after killing all his Green Lantern friends, and even a one-time rival turned villain, Sinestro, he managed to achieve his goals of stepping inside the Central Power Battery. But what we didn't know at the time was that this was all a long-term manipulation by Sinestro, his arch-villain, and the true Parallax. But isn't Hal Parallax? Well, yes and no. You see, the true Parallax is actually an entity of fear that represents conceptual fear, and had rampaged across pretty much all of creation until a few billion years back. All of the Guardians of the Universe simultaneously came together and managed to trap it inside the Central Power Battery by using its polar opposite, willpower, and the Central Power Battery where Ion is located, the entity of willpower. And it lay there for billions of years in an almost catatonic-like state, causing the weakness to all the lantern rings of yellow, because yellow is the color of fear. Thanks to Sinestro, who wound up being imprisoned inside that same Central Power Battery, he spoke to it, and they worked together on a plan to essentially have it and Sinestro escape, and exert its influence on somebody who could do that. That target was Hal Jordan. This explains Hal Jordan's descent into madness, as Parallax had essentially began exerting its fear hacks on Hal Jordan, causing him to go mad. And this is what drove him to make that tragic lunge to Oa and do all the horrific things he did once he got there and on the way there. And he is the man with the most willpower, and the man with the most willpower also has the most fear, which made him an ideal candidate for Parallax. So when he did get to Oa and walked in the Central Power Battery, of course, Parallax grafted itself onto Hal Jordan's soul as he stepped in, convincing him to give up the title of Green Lantern entirely and take on its name, the name of Parallax, the name of fear. Emerging possessed by Parallax, he stopped at nothing to achieve his goals. But enough of this character analysis. This is supposed to be a scaling video. So here are some of the most disturbing and powerful feats the man with the most willpower, possessed by the being that represents pure fear, has within DC's continuity in its full arsenal. Getting to actual feats, I want you to visualize your absolute favorite character, or the most powerful DC hero you can think of from the 80s or 90s. Do you have them visualized? Alright, well there's a high probability that Parallax Hal Jordan backhanded them with his absurd power. And worse yet, there is a much higher probability he probably not only backhanded them, chained them up with some constructs, but he did it to them when there was an entire team of superheroes working with them. Because Hal Jordan is constantly team busting. It's one of the best things he really has to offer, and this is made consistent when he walks up to the biggest league teams in verse like the Justice League and the JSA and folds them like origami in real time in 1 or 2 attacks. A prime example of this is his multiversal ass kicking that he handed out during the events of 0 Hour. I mean, literally, just look at his panel where Kyle's just in the background after he one-shot Superman with everybody else present, and he's just like, oh my god! Like, he's freaking out. Look at this, it's hilarious to me. Tearing apart teams is something that's super consistent for Parallax Hal Jordan throughout his entire career. And there is a variety of times where he just slaps aside the absolute strongest characters in the era. Take, for example, this version of Guy Gardner, who, in a weaker state, had his punches compared to Doomsday, and also a possibly fighter than Doomsday by Superman himself, who had other superheroes, not to mention Supergirl in this era, who could mess up the Anti-Monitor, and he was thrashing them up all together. A much stronger Guy Gardner with Sinestro's ring was on a team of superheroes, which included Wonder Woman, who's got great God Sphere scaling in this era, Martian Manhunter, who's constantly being compared to Superman, and Alan Scott, who has consistently thrown hands with Hal and other many top tiers in verse. And then things get really wild when you consider Captain Atom is actually also here. Why is this relevant? Because Captain Atom in this era threw hands and even defeated Necron. And if you want to get an idea of how absurd Necron scaling can get, be sure to check out my video on Necron. It's absolutely wild. He's got some amazing high-end feats. Parallax Hal just rolls up, impales Guy, and anybody else who defies him, he just one-shots, throws chains on them, and BFRs them back to Earth. Like, he literally doesn't care about any of the characters here. They are literally nothing in comparison to what he's repping just from a physicality standpoint. Back to the 0 Hour event, he basically kicks the ass of everyone in the entire multiverse to the point where everyone, even Godsphere level characters, have to start teaming up to deal with him because he's become such a threat physically. This included the Specter, who could casually throw hands with Zeus. This guy can unravel all of reality and ravel all of reality in his hands at will, which is impressive. Jim Corrigan Specter could also withstand the power of the Source for a short amount of time, also wildly like insane. Go to hell, beat up all of the demons of hell, and like beat the crap out of anybody you could possibly imagine, because Jim Corrigan Specter has arguably some of the most consistently strong feats for the Specter, and he could not alone stop him. The best he could do was slow him down so other characters could undo some of his machinations, which is like absurd to think about. But it's not like it's just this version of Specter that got his ass handed to him by Parallax Hal Jordan. He actually throws hands with 2 other versions of the Specter throughout the ages, essentially, even when he wasn't as powerful or potentially as powerful as he was during the events of 0 Hour. He threw hands with both the Hal Jordan version of Specter as well as the Crispus Allen version of Specter as well. And against Hal Jordan's Specter, he literally rips off his head after a short fight and kicks the goal of a lifetime by kicking his head into the Overvoid. The only reason he could have been stopped in this story is because he fused with the Overvoid and Logos itself to become Oversoul Specter, one of the most powerful versions of any DC character who's existed. This is absolutely absurd. Like, to give you an idea, there are very few characters who are on this kind of level who have statements of like becoming one with the Void. He also ran up against Crispus Allen during the Blackest Night event, And Crispus Allen Specter actually had a Black Lantern ring. Amp didn't stop Parallax Hal Jordan. Not only did he shred him to pieces, destroy his Black Lantern ring, he rolled up on him, ripped his face off, and said, "Don't act tough, you're like a total loser. If you want to come up with me, I'll destroy you." And even in Green Lantern Rebirth, an unbound Specter by any mortal, which is literally stated to be too powerful and has to be bound with the soul, ran in terror from Parallax Hal Jordan. This should give you an idea of how absurd that even Godsphere level characters are little in comparison to Parallax Hal Jordan. I mean, his physical might and combat prowess was feared so much by everyone, it even gave Batman PTSD. Parallax one-shotted Extant, who is basically Monarch just for the lulz, and then made that guy his minion during 0 hour. Not to mention, he walked up, one-shot Time Trapper, and absorbed all his chronal energies. And in Final Night, he even managed to, albeit by sacrificing his life, defeat a creature known as a Sun Eater, or a Star Eater, that was capable of entirely negging the most powerful minds and heroes on Earth from doing anything of stopping this creature from devouring our star and killing everybody on the entire planet. If not for him, everybody would have lost. Despite being an absolute monster, Parallax Hal Jordan's raw power and absurd abilities are only rivaled by his wide array of hacks, which are equally ridiculous. So, I've been bringing up 0 hour a lot. It's a crisis event and those are really important. I'll get into them later, but Hal did a lot in this event, so I'm going to refer to it a lot. And most of what he did in this event was due to these things called entropy waves that he could create. These waves were so powerful, they began entirely annihilating all of time and existence, as well as wiping out entire teams of heroes before they could even react to what he was doing. And sometimes, even characters who could react and tried to stop these attacks were unironically killed by trying to do so, like Wally West, who essentially ran to his death trying to stop this, just like Barry did in the first crisis against Antimatter. These waves went on to entirely destroy creation despite literal gods, new gods, and other beings that exist beyond the confines of space and time, all teaming up to put a stop to Parallax Hal Jordan's antics exclusively with these entropy waves nonetheless. And he could even create literally any universe he wanted as a result of more hacks that he had. His chronal energy adaptation was pretty wild, and his whole goal in doing this was to create basically a multiverse where every good thing that could happen would happen, and he could avoid all the bad situations, so nobody had to lose important things to themselves, and nobody had to lose in general. Wait a minute. Did Madara rip off Parallax Hal Jordan? Huh, food for thought. So he could create any universe he really wanted, and he did so with both the chronal powers that he had, as well as anti-crisis energies he had absorbed after the first crisis by leaving the time stream. Crisis energies are some of the most powerful things inside all of DC cosmology, so it's very important to note that he was absorbing them in the first place, but not only did he absorb crisis energies, he absorbed them from, according to Infinite Frontier, the worst and most dangerous and powerful crisis of them all, the first one, which included the Anti-Monitor. Using these powers or energies alongside those entropy waves, he was essentially capable of entirely rebooting all of DC by destroying all of creation itself and then moonwalking into the white void beyond, claiming this is over, it's 0 hour. So other major hacks that he utilizes are things like teleportation, which he uses both on himself and others to a very frightening degree, often running up against characters he thinks that aren't worth his time, like Kyle Rayner, Green Lantern, and just snapping his fingers and making him teleport back to Earth, or a variety of other characters who he just doesn't want to deal with at the time because he thinks they're annoying, or himself as he teleports from the source wall to Earth, or from Earth to outside the time stream, or to any point in time that he wants. Because one of the things that makes him unique, especially with the chronal energies he has at his disposal, is not only can he teleport anywhere in time, but he can sense anybody tampering with time or around time, especially when it comes to his past, and show up immediately to that moment in time and stop them from doing so. And you think, well, wait a minute, if he's concerned about people in his pasts, well, isn't he affected by time still? Well, at his most powerful, Hal Jordan, as I said earlier, completely destroyed all of time in existence. Well, he would be included in that in terms of his past. And everything was gone. He rebooted everything in DC, demonstrating he's clearly beyond the concepts of space and time, both in one moment and in terms of even his past. He's no longer connected to any of those things at all. Since he exists outside of time, even people just moving around in time, he can find, catch, and then beat the hell out of, just like he did Booster Gold and the Blue Beetle crew, as well as others who are Time Masters trying to move through time and do all sorts of shenanigans. Or take, for example, whenever Time Trapper constantly kept running from him, and he essentially cut him in half and stole all his chronal energy simply because they also exist out of time and affect time in a variety of different ways. But once again, Parallax Hal Jordan has a unique relationship with time, especially during the 0 hour and pre-0 hour era, which allowed him to pretty much do anything inside and outside of it. Being just like any other lantern, even though he doesn't need a ring to do anything he does, he can create constructs that are limited in scope simply due to the user's imagination, and of course he uses them to great effect, creating all sorts of different things to both terrorize his opponents, as well as just genuinely beat the hell out of them, even if they are like simple objects that come from the subconscious or the consciousness of Hal Jordan. He's a master at utilizing these constructs in combat, to say the least, and has some sort of really weird regenerative capabilities, like whenever he walked up to Jon Stewart and is like, yo, I heard you were a paraplegic while I was gone, but guess what? Not anymore. And then Jon was just cured and could walk again. Like, it's actually pretty interesting to think that those are some things that he kind of has just in his kit, I guess. Another really crazy weird hacks is his ability to turn people into energy and absorb them into him, and then also to be capable of releasing those characters as well, which are some very frustrating hacks that unfortunately not a lot of people can deal with, if I'm being 100%. And of course, he's got some pretty potent energy blasts, which tear through even the strongest characters inside DC pretty consistently in this era, which is pretty awesome. Parallax Hal has also demonstrated pretty extreme size alteration on a few different occasions, and also has this weird ability where when he was fighting like Cyborg Superman, he essentially surrounded him with constructs and forced all those constructs on him and shrank that construct down into something he could fit into his palm, and then it was gone. So it's kind of unclear as to whether he can trap people or seal people within like a pocket dimension and just like keep that in the back burner, or whether he just literally condensed Cyborg Superman down into a ball that was so small you could no longer see at all. Which is like, damn. However, the most OG ability of Parallax Hal is actually his fear hacks. Because if you remember back to the origin story, Parallax, the true Parallax, is actually the concept of fear, and it weaponizes that in a very, very, very extreme way. As it can create constructs out of your fears, or just use fear hacks against you, so you're so afraid you hold back, or you actually turn on your allies and begin attacking them. Take, for example, at one point he made the most powerful magicians alive so afraid that they couldn't even cast their magics. This included like Dr. Fate and Zatanna. Dr. Fate is literally has the power of a Lord of Order. So this scales to pretty high-end God Sphere-like beings, which is pretty absolutely mad if you're asking me. And then also with his fear hacks, he grabbed Kilowog, Guy Gardner, and John Stewart, and had them turn on their allies. Each one of Kilowog turned on one of the Guardians of the Universe, and John Stewart and Guy turned on the whole League and was wrecking them. So there might even be an amp there, because traditionally those characters aren't seen as like Justice League busters, for example, which was pretty crazy in my opinion. And the whole League themselves actually was fear-hacked into believing that Hal Jordan was actually the villain of the Green Lantern Rebirth story, even though they could actively see Parallax in the background causing the problems. And they were literally told and explained that Parallax is fear-hacking them. So like even characters with mental resistances on a wild scale, like Batman, Wonder Woman, and Superman, all of them were affected by this, infected by these hacks, or infected is at least the way Hal Jordan describes these things when referring to them inside that run. And for the creme de la creme in terms of his hacks or even resistance, depending on how you choose to look at this, after he destroyed Cyborg Superman at the edge of the Source Wall, he begins to think like, yo, I kicked everyone's ass, I'm like bored. And he begins to look at the Source Wall and think, well, the most powerful beings who ever existed attempted to move past that wall and they got stuck to it. I wonder if that'll happen to me. And so he puts his hand up. And he puts his hand up on the wall. The Source Wall. And the Source Wall cannot absorb him. That's how absurd Hal Jordan Parallax's hacks are. And the worst part is, that wasn't even while he was at his most powerful. That wasn't even during the events of 0 Hour. So before we finish up here, I thought I'd roll and hit you guys with a few different fun facts about Parallax Hal Jordan. Parallax Hal Jordan has killed an infinite amount of souls and has only been outdone in that field by the Anti-Monitor, as stated as the Specter, and this guy would be a pretty good source of information whenever it comes to people who've died, because he's really fueled by vengeance, been to the afterlife, yada yada yada. And Hal Jordan Parallax is also an avatar of Perpetua and the Great Darkness, as demonstrated in both the 2018 run and then of course the most recent content dealing with the Great Darkness. And to give you an idea, like, the people who are avatars of these people exclusively create crisis events, and crisis events are these massive events that attempt to erode and weaken the entire DC creation by destroying its fabrics. And to give you an idea of some of the other characters who kind of sit on this exact same level, we have characters like the Anti-Monitor, the Darkest Night, Darkseid, Superboy Prime, and Mandrak, to give you an idea. And all of these events threaten not only the DC multiverse, and when I say that, I mean everything within the Source Wall on the map, with the intent to destroy the Source Wall itself, which could possibly explain his ability to put his hand up to the wall and be capable of resisting it, because he was powerful enough to create an event that, by definition, could weaken the wall. Needless to say, Parallax Hal Jordan is an absolute monster who can shred entire teams of heroes with amps, survive big bangs, beat up arguably some of the strongest characters in verse, like Specter, Extant, Superman. I mean, you pretty much name it and he's done it. His AP comfortably sits at high outerversal if you want to lowball DC cosmology, but if you want to be more reasonable, I think it's safer to say extraversal at the bare minimum. But hey, I mean, you do you depending on your interpretation of DC cosmology. Just keep in mind he blew it up. His hacks are also wildly difficult to get around, which, as I said, can affect and destroy all of creation in terms of what the range is with those entropy waves, and his energy absorption and projection of those crisis energies. Not to mention his time hacks and levels of existence within the cosmology make him very hard to get to and affect. His durability and resistances are likely higher due to his resistances to higher dimensional structures such as the Source Wall. And that Source Wall feat, as I said prior, isn't even when he's at his most powerful. He also tanked attacks from pretty much every single character ever, which is also wildly impressive. In terms of speed, he keeps up with beings who could run through time with speed alone, and can just teleport within all of time and outside of time and realms beyond realms outside of time as well, such as like Wally West, Superman, and Wave Rider himself, who just like casually wanders through time through speed alone. That being said, this video is absolutely crazy as could be. It was really long, and massive shoutouts to my boy Gravity Titan for requesting this bad boy. I'm sorry it took so long, but there's been a lot going on in my personal life, and I appreciate everyone for waiting and letting me present my case whenever it comes to the absurd powers of Parallax Hal Jordan. Also, huge shoutouts to JobberGodot, who actually took the time to edit this video and did a hella good job, because he always does really high quality content. Check out some of the other videos he's done for major creators as well. That being said, be sure to like and subscribe. Only more to come, and I look forward to seeing not only your guys' comments, tell me what you think about Parallax Hal Jordan down low, and I look forward to seeing you guys throughout my videos in the future. We'll see you later, Lanterns. Next time.